Have you ever been to this amusement park in Toronto? No? That makes sense. It doesn't exist anymore. For over 30 years, this stretch of Toronto's western waterfront drew hundreds of thousands of visitors every summer. It had a roller coaster, a dance hall, a boardwalk, and was once considered the largest outdoor swimming pool in the world. Then someone decided it was in the way. What you're looking at is what it might look like today if Toronto hadn't torn it down to build a highway. This is the story of Sunnyside Amusement Park. To understand what Sunnyside was, we have to go back to what the Toronto waterfront looked like in the early 1900s. In the years before the First World War, the stretch of lakeshore west of downtown was already well used. The Grand Trunk Railway ran along the water's edge. A hydro transmission corridor ran parallel to it. What remained between the rail lines and Lake Ontario was a narrow strip of shoreline. Swimming at the foot of Roncesvalles Avenue had been popular for decades, marked by a pumping station and then by the bridge connecting Lakeshore Road to the King, Queen and Roncesvalles intersection. The swimming spot was not properly developed by the city for public use. Private clubs, like Parkdale Canoe Club, had already claimed the usable stretches with their private facilities and membership fees. This changed in 1911, when the Toronto Harbour Commission was established with the goal of managing and developing the waterfront. A year later, the Commission launched a comprehensive plan to redesign the entire Toronto shoreline. Its primary purpose was to transform the city into a functioning major port. East of downtown, the Commission was infilling the Don River marshes for port and industrial use. In the central core, it was pushing the waterfront south to create new commercial land. On the west end, the Commission used a different approach. To justify the reclamation cost of a shoreline expansion, it planned the construction of a public resort. The waterfront plan was approved at a cost of around $19 million. Work began in 1914, but was interrupted by the First World War, resuming after the armistice. By the time the project reached completion in the late 1910s, the waterfront had been extended by more than 90 meters. The firm appointed to design the park and all its buildings was Chapman, Oxley, and Bishop. Alfred Chapman was the most prominent civic architect in Toronto at the time, the man responsible for the Princess Gates and the Ontario Government Building at Exhibition Place. The design drew explicitly on English and American seaside vacation spots. The overall concept was a working-class resort, designed to the same standards as the places the middle and upper-class Torontonians traveled to reach, dropped onto manufactured land at the west end of the city. The centerpiece of the whole complex was the Beaux Arts Bathing Pavilion. The Harbour Commission had studied and selected a bathing pavilion at Lynn Beach in Massachusetts as the model, and asked Chapman to build one adapted for Toronto's scale and climate. Built in concrete and faced with classical columns, symmetrical towers, and a grand decorative archway at the entrance, it was 400 feet wide and set approximately 37 meters back from the lake. On June 28, 1922, the not yet complete Sunnyside Amusement Park opened to the public. That didn't appear to matter because with tickets at 25 cents, equivalent to $4.50 today, 28,000 people showed up. Torontonians gave it the nickname the Poor Man's Riviera. Access to the park was also great, with direct streetcar service. Cars marked with the words "bathing car" dropped riders directly at the gates from neighborhoods across the city. For the first time, there was something on this stretch of the waterfront that cost a quarter, required nothing more than a streetcar ride, and belonged to anyone who wanted to come. Sunnyside hit its stride fast. By the mid-1920s, the park was at full build-out. Attractions like the Flyer roller coaster, the Derby Racer steeplechase, and the Dodgem cars were crowd favorites. The park ran Victoria Day to Labor Day without interruption. Then came the tank. 2 cold summers had driven bathers out of the lake. The response, in 1925, was the construction of a heated pool beside the pavilion, officially the Sunnyside Outdoor Natatorium, but nicknamed the Tank. It was 91 meters long, with capacity for 2,000 swimmers. It had a diving tower and bleachers for spectators. At its opening, it was considered one of the largest outdoor swimming pools in the world. Sunnyside quickly became the place where Toronto's working class and immigrant communities spent their summers. At the time, there was nowhere else like it and no better way to reach the lake. Sam Snyderman, later known as Sam the Record Man, recalled the tank as the place to parade like peacocks, showing off stunned muscles. The boardwalk was where you went to see and be seen, regardless of what neighborhood you came from or what language you spoke at home. The Palais Royal, on the eastern edge of the complex, had become one of the premier dance venues in the English Canada at the late 1930s. Bert Niosi, Canada's king of swing, held residencies there for full seasons. Count Basie played at the Hall. The Miss Toronto pageant, launched at Sunnyside in 1926, drew thousands of spectators annually to the beach. Then, on September 9, 1954, Sunnyside witnessed history. The night before, American swimmer Florence Chadwick entered Lake Ontario at Youngstown, New York, with the offer of $10,000 from the CNE to complete the crossing of the lake. This offer stung Canadian swimmers Marilyn Bell, a 16-year-old from Toronto, and Winnie Lisler, the first Canadian to swim the English Channel. They decided to enter the challenge with no pay. After hours of swimming in tough conditions, Chadwick and Lisler quit. Bell swam through the night, through the following day, for 20 hours and 59 minutes. She was supposed to land at the CNE grounds, but instead she came ashore at Sunnyside. This was the first time someone swam across Lake Ontario, and it was the last great moment Sunnyside would ever have. The following summer would be the park's last season. The document that would end Sunnyside was written more than a decade earlier, in 1943. That year, the City of Toronto Board published a master plan for the urban area. At its center was a network of superhighways crisscrossing the city. One followed the lakeshore, named the Lakeshore Expressway, running from the Queen Elizabeth Way at the Humber River east along the waterfront, directly through Sunnyside. Through the late 1940s, the park's attendance softened. Automobiles were becoming affordable, which meant Muskoka and Georgian Bay were now within reach for a summer weekend. At the same time, the Harbour Commission wasn't replacing aging infrastructure, and private concessionaires, aware of the expressway plan circulating in planning circles, weren't reinvesting. In the press, the tone shifted. Editorials called the park an obstacle to progress. One Globe and Mail piece suggested the amusement area might become a 1,200-car parking lot, in addition to the expressway. Then, in 1953, the municipality of Metropolitan Toronto was created. Premier Leslie Frost appointed Frederick Goldwyn Gardiner as the first chairman. Gardiner was 58, a conservative lawyer from Forest Hill. He reveled in his reputation as a political bulldozer. He had been thinking about a waterfront expressway since at least 1947. Now, he had the authority to build it. One of Metro's first acts was Gardiner's motion, in July 1953, to begin planning the Lakeshore Expressway. It passed unanimously. The western section would run directly over the footprint of Sunnyside. By 1954, construction was formally approved at $50 million. Sunnyside closed at the end of the 1955 season. In November, with the grounds empty for the winter, 3 fires broke out within weeks of each other. In the third, the concession building beneath the flyer was gutted, along with the ride's supports. Contemporary accounts called the fire suspicious. No cause was ever confirmed. The Harbour Commission ordered demolition. Through the winters of 1955 and into 1956, the rides came down. The carousel was sold and shipped to California. It became the King Arthur Carousel at Disneyland, where it still operates. The Derby Racer went to the CNE. Most of the rest became fill. The Globe and Mail had already run its farewell piece, Nostalgia, a fond farewell Sunnyside, in February 1956. The expressway's first section opened on August 2nd, 1958. Only 2 facilities from the park remained, the Bathing Pavilion and the Palais Royal. They survived solely because they were not in the way of the highway. In the 1970s and 80s, the pavilion was designated under the Ontario Heritage Act, then restored. The pool was rededicated as the Gus Ryder Pool, named after the swimming coach who had trained Marilyn Bell for her 1954 crossing. Today, the Bathing Pavilion and the Palais Royal are still there, operating primarily as private spaces. The pool still opens during the summer, free of charge. What's harder to replace is what Sunnyside represented, a public space built specifically for people who couldn't afford anything better. a place where the waterfront belonged to everyone. If the park survived, what it would look like today is hard to say. It would have certainly changed, adapted, maybe failed, or maybe reinvented itself. But if you walk by the bathing pavilion on a summer afternoon, it's hard not to imagine what else it might have been. If you like this type of content and would like to learn more about the environment that surrounds us, please consider leaving a like and subscribing to this channel. Stay tuned for more!